The cups were still warm, the fine porcelain retaining the tea's residual breath, as if even the crockery was reluctant to let the evening go. The almond biscotti I had baked the day before still lay untouched on the plate, rosy-hued slices, fragrant and fragile, as if awaiting someone's fingers to pick them up and dip them into the drink. It was 7 in the evening, the very time Liam usually walked through the door, slightly tired but with a soft smile and a quiet Eliza. This time, he did not. I had been staring at the front door longer than I was willing to admit even to myself, almost catching in the air the sound of a key turning in the lock, a sound I knew by heart and that somehow always promised calm. But instead, there was silence. Not the kind that rests in a house at night, but another kind, dense, heavy, seeping into the bones, making the skin grow cold with the realization that not everything can be brought back. My name is Eliza Armani, and for 15 years I had believed my marriage was an example to those who saw us together. Liam was an even-tempered, educated man, one of those who always knows how to carry himself and what to say. He filled a room with a silence that did not oppress, but soothed, as if his presence was a remedy for the world's bustle. He never raised his voice, was never late, brought me flowers on Sundays, roses, usually white, sometimes tea roses, and wore impeccably ironed shirts with buttons, as if discipline itself lived in his hands. I never thought about money, bills, the future. All that was his concern, and I accepted his certainty as one accepts the familiar light of morning. We had no children, and perhaps that was why life flowed so smoothly, without storms, without upheavals, as if we truly were two puzzle pieces that had once come together and become a single image. Only now do I understand that this puzzle was missing pieces, and one of them was hidden where I was never allowed to look. Liam died on a Thursday. They said it was a heart attack. I still remember the doctor's face, benevolent, trained for sympathy, but his eyes held a detachment, as if he said this every day. "Massive myocardial infarction," he said, and I nodded as if I understood, as if those words could somehow explain how an entire life ceases to exist. He was gone quickly, without warning, without a chance for a goodbye. I thought it would matter, but when you lose the only person you thought knew you to your core, no medical terminology sounds convincing. The funeral passed in a fog, blurred faces, black fabric, quiet phrases of condolence from people whose names I couldn't remember. But they all said the same thing: what a wonderful man my husband was. I nodded, smiled, clutched a lace handkerchief in my hands, and held on to Greta, my old friend, always reliable, attentive, with that calmness only those who have seen much can maintain. She offered me water I didn't drink and food I couldn't swallow. This continued until my sister Beatrice arrived. She appeared in the house, as always, confidently, with the scent of overly sweet perfume and hugs that lasted longer than necessary. Her words, "I'm so sorry, sis," were soft, but their warmth held a strange falseness, as if something else was hiding behind it. Liam was like a brother to her, she said, and I wanted to believe her. Truly I did, but her eyes held no sorrow. There was something else there, something light, flickering, unsettling. Later that same evening, when the house had emptied and the candles on the windowsill were burning down, Beatrice stood in my kitchen, pouring herself a drink, and said, trying to sound casual, "I know it's probably not the time, but Liam lent me some money. I thought we could sort it out, since you've sorted everything else." I looked at her, not immediately grasping the meaning. "What money?" I asked, and she, blinking, smiled as if she'd heard a joke. "Oh, so he didn't tell you?" Her voice was too light, too confident, and in that moment something inside me snapped, as if one of the threads holding everything familiar had suddenly come undone. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the house as if for the first time, touching the furniture, the polished surfaces, the frame with our wedding photo that now seemed alien. I was searching for answers in things, as if wood and fabric could hold a secret. And then I saw them, Liam's keys, still lying on the hallway table. Among them was one, special, not like the others. The very key I had once asked about, and he had answered with a soft smirk. "Nothing interesting, Eliza. Tools, lubricant, you wouldn't like it." I hadn't insisted. Not then. Our marriage had always been built on a silent agreement not to touch certain doors, not to ask certain questions. But now I had nothing left to lose. The next morning I went there, to that very garage he had mentioned in passing, as if it were something mundane. The building stood on the outskirts of the old industrial district, behind rows of half-ruined warehouses, with rusty roofs and weeds breaking through the cracked asphalt. Not the kind of place you'd expect a man like Liam to keep something of his own, and yet he had come here every week on Thursdays with that very consistency I had considered his virtue. I had never doubted. Now I was to find out, whether in vain. The metal door was heavier than I had expected, and when the key finally turned in the lock with a dull, reluctant groan, I froze for a moment, as if stepping into the unknown required far more courage than I had anticipated, afraid that beyond this threshold something would begin that would shatter the last remnants of my peace. A musty smell of dust, old oil, something metallic and forgotten, wafted from within, like the breath of time trapped within four walls. I reached for the light switch, but my hand froze in mid-air because the very feel of the space around me suggested, this is not a garage. No tools, no boxes, no smell of cars. Before me was not a storage room for things, but rather a temple erected from someone else's memories, meticulously and painfully gathered piece by piece. I took a step inside, and the ceiling lamps came to life, buzzing, flashing with a pale, sickly light, revealing a sight that took my breath away. The walls were covered with photographs, newspaper clippings, maps, sheets with hand-drawn schematics. Everything was neatly, pedantically arranged, as if someone was creating a map of an entire life. Not mine, not ours, but a completely different one. On one wall, photos hung in dense rows, like someone else's chronicle, and I felt the air tremble with the multitude of faces frozen in smiles. Liam. In every picture, it was him, but not the one I knew. Not my Liam, not that impeccable man in suits and iron shirts. Here he was different, alive, free, with disheveled hair, in jeans and simple shirts, laughing with a soft expression on his face that I no longer remembered. His eyes looked different, without that inner distance that always stood between us, and in almost every picture, next to him, was a woman. The same one. She was beautiful, about 10 years younger than me, with thick dark hair and a face that spoke of strength and confidence. Her hand rested on his arm, her smile reflected in his eyes, and his gaze towards her was full of warmth, the very warmth I had once known but had long lost. In one photo, they stood on a seashore, barefoot, surrounded by sunset light. In another, they were laughing in the snow at a ski resort. In a third, they sat in the semi-darkness of a restaurant by candlelight, and in their postures, in the way she leaned slightly towards him and he towards her, there was nothing accidental. On the back of some photos, I noticed dates: 7 years ago, 5, 3, 1, and the last one, August 2024. I remembered that day. I was at home, preparing his favorite stew, setting fresh flowers on the table, waiting for him to return from a meeting with a client, while he, as it now turned out, was sitting somewhere with this woman and a man about 30 years old. All three were smiling like a family, and below the photo, in Liam's handwriting, was written, Isabel and Nathan, August 2024. The name pierced me like a needle. My knees buckled and I leaned on the nearest metal table to keep from falling. The surface was cold, but in that coldness, I felt a strange consolation, as if the metal was holding me up, preventing me from falling apart. On the table lay folders, neatly stacked. I opened one. Bank transfers, invoices, documents from foreign companies, tax forms with nothing familiar in them. Not a single mention of his real business, not a single line that could somehow explain what he was doing during those hours when he said he was working late. And then I saw an envelope with a logo, the Heart Institute. The paper was fresh, the date just 2 months ago. Liam's name, full, official, was printed at the top, and below it a diagnosis that took my breath away. A rare form of ischemic heart disease, stage 3, high risk of sudden cardiac arrest. I read these lines over and over until I realized a simple thing. He knew. He knew he was dying, knew that time was short, and instead of telling me, preparing me, explaining, he had created another world for himself, where he was needed, loved, alive. A world where, perhaps, he had found the family I never even suspected. I raised my eyes to the photographs, the woman, the man, and the boy. Nathan, their son. Everything inside me turned over. 15 years, a life built on trust, on habit, on quiet love. And all of it turned out not to be what I had lived. I had buried a man I only half knew. The rest of his existence had been hidden from me, like the dark side of the moon, always nearby but forever in darkness. I remembered the night before his death. He came up to me, handed me a velvet box with a sapphire necklace, kissed my cheek, and said quietly, "You are the only one for me." Back then, I felt gratitude, touched by tenderness, but now those words sounded like cruel irony. I staggered, stepping back towards the door, feeling my legs give way, and the air became so thick it was impossible to breathe. Something tightened in my chest, pulsing with pain, and my thoughts raced, clinging to every grain of memory, trying to understand where the lie had begun. What now? Who had I become? A widow, yes, but the widow of whom? The man who gave me flowers, or the one who lived in this secret world behind a metal door? I heard footsteps, quiet, hesitant, as if the person stepping was trying not to disrupt some forbidden symphony, and just as suddenly the whole world narrowed to the sound of feet on the concrete floor. I turned sharply, my heart pounding wildly in my chest as if trying to outrun my thoughts. And on the threshold, in the fading light of the lamps, appeared that very young man from the photograph, that very Nathan, the same dark hair, the same sharp chin, and a gaze that pierced me just as Liam's once had. Only now these eyes seemed alien by right of possession, because they carried within them both kinship and mystery simultaneously. He spoke calmly, but his words at first dissolved in the pounding of my pulse. So loud did the echo of my own heart seem to me. "Beatrice Armani?" he said, and his voice was even, like the surface of water before a storm. But I didn't answer. I stood, pressing my palms against the edge of the table, which seemed the only object capable of keeping me on my feet, for the floor beneath me seemed to have vanished, and the world had split into before and after, before this meeting and after it. Nathan crossed the threshold unhurriedly, cautiously, as if stepping on someone else's soul, trying not to destroy the little that might still hold me in this world. "I'm Nathan," he said, and his voice was softer than I had expected. Liam Armani was my father. These words fell upon me with such force that I ceased to understand what to call myself. Wife? Widow? And everything spun beneath my feet again, as if I had been carried out on a wave of truth I hadn't asked for and wasn't ready to accept. I tried to answer. I remember only a jumble of sounds. Perhaps I was silent. Perhaps I uttered something incoherent. But then I managed to whisper, barely audibly, your son?" "Yes," Nathan confirmed without hesitation, and his word held neither reproach nor triumph, merely a statement of fact that had overturned my life. He lowered his gaze and added quietly, with a regret I couldn't accept, "I'm sorry. I never wanted you to find out this way." "How long have you known about me?" I asked, my voice a thin whisper, and Nathan paused for a moment, as if weighing whether to open another wound, but then said calmly, "All my life." he explained, not immediately revealing all the details, that his father had kept their lives separate, that his mother, Isabel, had respected this silence and didn't interfere, that there were their own rules and boundaries between them. But after Isabel's death last year, everything had changed. And then, according to Nathan, Liam began giving him more rights to a part of his secret life. I sat down in a dusty armchair, my legs no longer able to hold me. "Why are you here?" I asked, and Nathan, putting his hand into his backpack, pulled out a folded document, its edges yellowed with time. He handed me the sheet, and I, with trembling fingers, unfolded it. "This is a draft will," he said, "unfinished, unofficial. Father gave it to me 2 weeks before he died, said the official letter would be delivered to you, and this, just in case." Liam's handwriting was recognizable, even the very same that adorned greeting cards and dinner notes, and these familiar loops suddenly seemed treacherously alien. The scrawled lines spoke of asset distribution, mentioned Nathan's name, mentioned a company I had never heard of, Mercury South Holdings, and something else, access to documents stored in an office vault, and a code linked to a personal item gifted to B. I froze, because B stood for me. The necklace, the sapphire one, gifted to me 2 days before his death, turned out to be not just a piece of jewelry, but a key that opened not a box, but a door to someone else's life. I instinctively touched my collarbone, where it could not hang because I had left the gift in its box at home, deeming it too heavy, and now this piece of jewelry had become even heavier in my mind and the burden I was forced to carry. "What is Mercury South Holdings?" I asked, continuing to look through the document, and Nathan sighed, replying that it was one of his father's private firms, not public, used for international transfers and complex financial maneuvers. After his mother's death, he had started digging and found untraceable transfers, offshore accounts opened in my name that I had never known about or opened, and realized that his father was probably trying to arrange something for all of us, to provide, as he thought, for the future. My throat went dry. "Why?" I asked, and Nathan quietly uttered what became the burning truth. Because he knew time was running out, and then added something else that made my blood run cold, and because he didn't trust the people he worked with. I looked up and asked, "What people?" And Nathan's face darkened. He didn't name names, only said that if anything happened to him, someone would come for information, for leverage, for what he had left. I leaned back in the chair, feeling the air in the room become viscous like honey, my thoughts racing feverishly, colliding, bouncing off each other like frightened birds in a cage. A second safe, a company I'd never heard of, a necklace that might hide a code, and the man I had loved for 15 years. A man who, it turned out, had built a whole world beyond mine. I asked, not recognizing my own voice, "Are you saying there's something else? That all this, the photos, the documents, the will, is just the beginning?" Nathan nodded, not taking his eyes off me, in which was reflected not sympathy, but a weary understanding. I think he left more than just things. He was trying to protect us. I slowly rose to my feet, my legs trembling as if they couldn't remember how to support the weight of my body. And I, glancing around the room one last time, realized it no longer seemed like a secret sanctuary to me. It had become evidence, proof, and a warning. "I need to go home," I said, and my voice sounded alien. "I need that necklace." Nathan inclined his head slightly and said calmly, "May I come with you?" I hesitated, but then nodded because, whether I wanted it or not, this was no longer just my story. I didn't go home immediately. I needed space to collect myself, to at least partially sort out this chaos that had turned my life into a puzzle without a center. I called Greta. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in her living room, clutching a mug of tea I had no intention of drinking. On the table between us, under the lampshade, lay the sapphire necklace, cold, gleaming like a drop of frozen night, and it seemed that if I touched it, it would explode like a grenade, scattering all that remained of my composure. Greta didn't ask. She never asked until I was ready. We were silent for a long time, until the tea grew cold and the shadows on the walls stretched out like threads of memory. When I finally told her everything about the garage, the photos, Nathan, the will, she just exhaled, "I'm so sorry," and reached out her hand, softly, carefully. But I couldn't afford to break down. I couldn't cry. Tears seemed a luxury I had lost along with the right to ignorance. I needed answers. I left the necklace in my bag and went to Beatrice's apartment. A new building, north of the city, glass and concrete, polished corridors, smells of expensive perfume and fresh paint, underground parking, coated gates, a concierge with a smile rehearsed for wealthy people. Strange for my sister, a woman who always complained about debts and bills, now suddenly living as if she'd won the lottery. The elevator rose slowly, and I felt my anger rising with it, turning into a living, hot creature beneath my skin. She opened the door barefoot in a silk pajama set, holding a glass of wine, and her face held that irritating calm that made everything inside me seethe. Her makeup was flawless, her hair neat, as if she was expecting someone. "Well, if it isn't my grieving sister," she drawled with a smile stretched like a ribbon. "Come to inspect the widow's inheritance?" "Stop talking nonsense, Beatrice," I snapped sharply. "We need to talk." I walked past her, feeling the heavy, sweet scent of her perfume, and stopped in the living room. On the wall, a photograph in a silver frame. Liam and her, laughing, holding champagne glasses. At the bottom of the picture, a date. 5 years ago. Something inside me snapped. I turned to her. "What the hell does this mean?" She took a sip of wine, came closer, looking at the photo, and said calmly, "Oh, that's a corporate party. You were too tired that time, remember? Liam insisted I go with him." She said it so lightly, as if it were a walk in the park, as if drinking champagne with my husband behind my back was a commonplace not worth mentioning. "We always got along well," she added, smiling. I turned to her, and the words flew out before I could think them through. "How well?" Her smirk wavered. Her gaze became wary. "I know about Isabel," I said slowly. "About Nathan, about the garage, about the fake company, about the will. I know everything. So if there's anything else, tell me now." Beatrice set down her glass, looked at me with cold attention, and I noticed her fingers trembling slightly. She slowly walked to the drinks trolley, poured herself another, and without looking, said, "Want the truth?" I didn't answer. She turned to me and, leaning her palm on her stomach, said quietly, almost solemnly, "I'm pregnant. From Liam." The words didn't register immediately. They seemed to pass through me, leaving emptiness in their wake. I didn't move, didn't blink. 10 weeks, she added, now with a hint of defiance. I found out a week before he died. He knew. He said he would take care of everything, that everything would change soon, that he would leave Isabel. My throat tightened. "Isabel is dead," I exhaled. "You kept seeing him after her death." Beatrice shrugged as if it were something insignificant. She was never meant to be permanent. I was always the one who stayed. Everything around me lost its contours at once. The walls, the furniture, the sound of the refrigerator, even my own breathing. Everything dissolved into background noise, like in murky water where it's impossible to tell which way is up and which is down. "You slept with my husband." The words escaped me in a hoarse whisper, as if it weren't a phrase but a burn, and as I said it, my tongue seemed to grow heavier with each syllable. Beatrice shrugged, calmly, almost bored, and this gesture, careless and lazy, hurt more than any confession. "Don't look at me like that," she said. "Don't act surprised. You had your perfect life, your perfect house, your dinners exactly at 7, your photos where you always smiled the right smile. And I was counting coins in my wallet, paying for a rented apartment, working miserable odd jobs, listening to Mom compare us as if I were some failed replica of you, a bad copy with the paint worn off. Then Liam appeared. He offered help. He listened. He was the one who looked at me not as a shadow. She raised her eyes, and something sharp, almost sinister, flashed in them, as if in an instant the mask of sisterly indifference had fallen away, revealing a raw nerve beneath. "You were his habit," she said, "and I was his salvation." The slap rang out before I realized my hand had risen, a dull sound of impact, the clink of glass, and her glass, slipping from her fingers, shattered, splashing crimson drops onto the white floor. Beatrice didn't cry, didn't scream. She just ran her fingers over her cheek and smiled, thinly, slightly crookedly, as if she had received confirmation of something she had long believed. "There she is, the real Beatrice," she said almost tenderly. "Not this prim, perfect wife, restrained to the point of indecency, but a woman who has just realized she's been living a lie all these years." I turned away, feeling my breath catch, my chest tighten, my palms tremble. My voice, when I spoke again, barely cut through the tension in the air. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because you wouldn't have believed me," she replied with a soft, almost weary sigh. "You always thought I was just jealous, and maybe at some point I was, but then it became different. It wasn't about you, Beatrice. It was about finally having something of my own, anything that didn't belong to you." I shook my head, not recognizing my own voice as I said, "You didn't just take something, you stole everything." Her face became impenetrable, as if covered in ice. She came closer, so close I could feel her breath, and said almost in a whisper, but with that stubborn calm behind which Beatrice always hid, "Say what you want, but there's a child growing inside me. He is your family, whether you like it or not." The air was knocked out of my lungs. I stood there, numb, feeling as if the floor had vanished beneath my feet. I wanted to scream, tear this room apart, grab time and rewind it back to the moment when I still believed in Liam, in us, in the life that now seemed an absurd dream. But instead, I forced out through clenched teeth, "I will abide by what he left in his will, not for your sake, for the child's, because he is not to blame for this nightmare." Beatrice blinked, and for the first time, her voice held not defiance, but something resembling confusion. "Are you serious?" "I don't know what's serious and what's not," I whispered. "But I know one thing. I need to leave." I headed for the door, not looking where I stepped, feeling the crunch of shards under my soles, as if the glass itself was whispering after me. My fingers trembled as I grabbed the doorknob, and everything that had once seemed solid, home, marriage, family, crumbled to dust, and I didn't answer her anything because for the first time I wasn't sure who I was now. That evening, I didn't go home. I couldn't cross the threshold of that tidy house with its perfect order, laid-out clothes, the bed where no one slept. Instead, I went back to Greta's, and all that time I clutched the sapphire necklace in my fist, as if it could burn through my skin and sear out the pain boiling beneath my ribs. Greta opened the door, looked at me, and understood everything without a word. "You need to sleep," she said quietly, and I just nodded, though I knew sleep wouldn't come. My thoughts collapsed, collided, crashed into each other, and each one began with Liam's name. The next morning, Nathan came for me. He looked tired but composed and said we needed to go. Greta flatly refused to let me go alone. "You're not going to your husband's secret vault without backup." She threw her coat over her shoulders, locked the door, and I didn't argue. Liam's office was in a high-rise in the heart of the city, a glass tower reflecting the morning sun, impeccably faceless, just like he himself had been in recent years. When I'd asked why he needed another office, he'd brushed it off, calling it a satellite space, a place for private meetings. I had never been there, but Nathan had a key card. "I'm a co-owner," he said shortly, and we were let past security without questions. Liam had built his life so that no one would ever ask questions. The elevator rose slowly, echoing like a pulse. The 14th floor greeted us with silence and cold, no traces of life, Just glass walls, a steel desk, cold furniture, and not a single photo of me. No paintings except one, a large abstract piece hanging behind the desk. It was at this that Nathan pointed, and from the way he did it, I understood. Behind this canvas was something more than just art. The safe was hidden behind the painting, behind that very mass of abstract lines and brush strokes in which I might once have seen something like symbolism. But now it seemed it had been painted only to hide the truth. I reached into my bag and pulled out the necklace, feeling the cold metal almost burning my fingers. A deep breath, and I found the tiny clasp, the one that had always seemed just a detail, an ornament. But now, turning it counterclockwise, I heard an almost imperceptible click, followed by a short, sharp silence. On the back of the sapphire pendant, a tiny hiding place opened. Tiny, like a secret that wasn't meant to be found. Inside lay a thin metal plate, the size of a SIM card, cold with numbers engraved along the edge, numbers arranged in a neat row like bullet marks. Nathan took the plate carefully, as if afraid even touch might erase its meaning, and inserted it into a narrow slot on the safe's keypad. A low, dull beep echoed in the room's walls. Then, a short electronic sound, and the massive door opened softly, as if it had been waiting for us. Inside, neat stacks of documents, a black flash drive, a small wooden box, and a single silver key with a tag labeled Federal Trust Bank Vault. Nathan immediately reached for the papers, started scanning the pages, and I saw the expression on his face change, from concentration to alarm. "These aren't just accounts," he said quietly. "It's a network. Contracts, transfers, bank records, international institutions." He wasn't just hiding money, he was moving it out quickly and skillfully, with a precision that suggested he was planning an escape. I picked up the flash drive, smooth, heavy, as if it truly contained something that shouldn't fall into the wrong hands. But I didn't plug it into a computer. Not yet. My heart was already beating too loudly. Instead, I picked up the wooden box. It was light, coated with a matte varnish, no lock, but with a symbol burned onto the lid, 2 intersecting circles, like a symbol of merged destinies. I opened the lid slightly and saw a ring, simple, gold, with a tiny diamond whose sparkle suddenly seemed cruel to me. My breath caught. This wasn't my ring. Inside the band, engraved with impeccable precision, was a short "To N always." Not B, not my letter, not my mark. Greta, standing nearby, said almost inaudibly, "Isabel." I felt Nathan tense. His jaw twitched, and he turned away as if afraid I'd see more than just sympathy in his gaze. "He bought her a ring," I said dully, feeling the words recede from me. He was going to propose to her, or maybe already had. A ringing silence filled the room, and I couldn't move or cry. Everything inside me seemed to freeze, because it was at that moment there in the soulless, cold office of the man I had once loved that I understood clearly for the first time. He had loved her. Perhaps in his own way he had loved me too, the one with whom he built the facade, the order, the habit. But she got the part where he was alive, the part where he laughed, where he was free, where he allowed himself to be himself. Everything else was a performance, carefully constructed, perfected. The husband who came home exactly for dinner at 7, brought roses on Sundays, said the right words, and kept another life behind a safe door. Nathan silently took a folded envelope from the safe. My name was written on it. Beatrice. I recognized the handwriting instantly, the very same he used for notes on the fridge and signatures on cards. My hands trembled as I opened the letter. The ink was slightly faded, but the words were alive, sharp, as if he were standing behind me and speaking them now. "Beatrice, if you are reading this, then I am gone. Forgive me. I never had the courage to tell you the truth, never had the spirit to destroy what we built, though I long knew I was lying to you and to myself. I was selfish. I lived 2 lives because I couldn't let go of either, and in the end, I lost both. I loved you as much as I could in my imperfect way. I know these words sound empty, but they are the only thing left that is real. I wanted you to live in peace, to have a choice. That is why I have left you everything, the documents, the access, the truth. What you do with it is up to you. Burn it, bury it, make it public. Forgive me if you can. If not, I will understand. Liam. I stared at the letter until the lines blurred, until my tears merged with the ink. Greta quietly took the sheet, read it, and handed it to Nathan. He read for a long time, silently, then simply folded the paper and returned it to me. No one said a word. What can you say about a man who destroyed 3 lives and still managed to sound like the one asking for forgiveness? We just stood there, among the shards, each one a piece of his truth. We left the office in silence. The air outside seemed alien, too real, too alive. Greta got behind the wheel, Nathan beside her, and I looked out the window at the city reflected, this serene, indifferent city he had walked through, hiding so many lies. My husband had lived a life I had never touched, and now that life, torn apart and discarded, lay in our hands. Later, as I tried to sleep on Greta's pull-out couch, my phone rang, an unknown number. I answered, feeling a chill run down my spine. "Beatrice Armani?" asked a male voice, even, confident. "Yes," I exhaled. "I was your husband's partner." My heart pounded so loudly I almost dropped the phone. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." "I don't know what you're talking about," I replied. "Oh, I think you do," he said. "The documents from the safe. There are accounts, transfers I helped your husband with. I suggest we meet, quietly, without a scene." "I'm not meeting anyone," I said. He chuckled. "You will meet, Beatrice, because the other people Liam worked with are not as polite as I am. They don't ask." The line went dead, and I lay for a long time, staring at the ceiling, feeling my heart beat faster and faster. The world I thought had died with him was only just beginning to come alive, and now it was looking right at me. In the morning, I told Nathan everything that had happened during the night, about the call, the voice that was too calm for a threat, and how afterwards it felt like even the walls of the apartment were breathing with fear. He stood by the window, grim, clenching his jaw so that shadows played across his face. "He called me too," he finally said, stepping back from the glass and starting to pace the room as if trying to warm his thoughts with movement. "But that's not all, Beatrice. Someone else called last night." He pulled a folded sheet of paper from his pocket, placed it on the table, and looked at me with a long, weary gaze. The name Victor Crane was written on the sheet. He claims he was the source of the funds Liam was transferring abroad, and he said— Nathan hesitated, as if reluctant to say it aloud. "If we don't return everything by the end of the week, there will be consequences." I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't need to. His voice held no doubt, only a dry statement of fact that sent a chill down my spine. I imagined Liam's shadows, his deals and connections, suddenly emerging, demanding payment for all he had managed to sweep away. Nathan opened the safe, took out the silver key, the one with the Federal Trust Bank vault tag. He held it carefully like a relic, a symbol that answers were still somewhere nearby. "We have this key," he said, "a safe deposit box no one but him knew about. Perhaps what's in there will explain who all this truly belongs to." I was silent for a long time, feeling anxiety grow in my chest, 2 feelings warring inside me, the desire to know and the horror of what we might find. "And if what's in there only makes things worse?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. Greta, who had been sitting nearby all this time, reached for me, her palm warm and reliable on top of mine. "Then at least you'll know," she said quietly. "And not knowing kills more slowly, but more surely." I nodded, understanding that resistance was pointless. And so we made a plan. First, the bank. If anything remained unclear, we would look for those who knew Liam better than we did. He must have had someone, a backup, a person he trusted when he could trust no one else. And then Nathan suddenly looked up. "There's one name," he said. "Mom mentioned him once. Jacopo Rentz, an old college friend of my father's. She said he was the only one who told Liam the truth, even when he didn't want to hear it." I tensed. That name seemed from another time, from a world where Liam was still a living person, not an enigma. "Do you know where to find him?" I asked. Nathan thought, then slowly replied, "I believe so. Mom had his address somewhere, in Savannah. She kept it in an emergency contacts box. I think he's still there." The drive took 2 hours. We drove almost in complete silence, and only the rain, dripping drop by drop down the windshield, drew winding lines like traces of mistakes lived. Savannah greeted us with thick air, humid and heavy, like the breath of an old city. Oaks stretched over the road, their branches intertwining to form an arch through which we drove, as if entering the past. Jacopo's house was tall, brick, covered in ivy, as if wanting to hide from prying eyes itself. It seemed to have stepped out of the pages of a long-forgotten novel, still alive in the shadows. When the door opened, a man in his 70s stood on the threshold with a clear gaze and a weary posture. "You're Beatrice?" he asked immediately, without hesitation. The name hit me like a plucked string. "No," I replied. He smiled slightly. "And you must be Nathan." Nathan nodded, and I saw his eyelid twitch, whether from surprise or from the recognition that this man knew too much. "Were you expecting us?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "Liam told me, if it all falls apart, you would come." And without another word, he stepped back, inviting us inside. It smelled of paper, old leather, and pipe smoke, a scent that held something comforting, reliable, like the smell of a library where answers are hidden. Bookshelves lined the walls, each full not just of books, but of time. An old but polished piano stood in the corner, as if someone had recently wiped it down, respecting the memory but not touching the keys. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the armchairs. We obediently settled in, and he disappeared into the next room. He returned a minute later with an envelope, sealed and covered with a thin layer of dust, as if it had been waiting for us for many years. "He left this with me," Jacopo said, "and told me to open it only if you came together." I felt a lump rise in my throat. Nathan and I exchanged glances. He nodded, and I carefully broke the seal. Inside was a short letter and a second document, a will. Liam's handwriting, confident, neat as always, but the meaning different. "This will concern the child Beatrice was carrying." I read aloud. "Upon reaching the age of 21, 25% of the personal savings held in offshore accounts are to be transferred to the child's name." I felt the blood drain from my face. Even this he had planned. Even where we thought we were acting in chaos, he had left a structure. Everything was deliberate. I looked up at Nathan, but he was already looking at Jacopo, and in his gaze was not so much surprise as weary understanding. "He was preparing," Nathan said hollowly, "from the very beginning." And I suddenly understood. We weren't just unraveling his secrets. We were standing in the center of a hurricane he had built with his own hands, brick by brick, hiding behind a mask of respectability. And now that storm was ours. I looked at the will again, at the name of the future child, Beatrice Armani. 25%, just a number, but it was a verdict. Everything we had learned, everything he had hidden, now belonged to the future he had left behind instead of himself. I wasn't struck by the sums or the cold rigor of the numbers, but by the very precision with which it was all calculated. Liam, even from his dead shadow, seemed to be moving ahead of us, 3 steps ahead of every decision we tried to make. I looked at the will and couldn't understand. Why had he named the child, but not mentioned Beatrice? Why was the trust given not to the mother, but to the one who wasn't yet born? I asked Jacopo this, and he, thoughtfully folding his hands, replied quietly, almost with sadness in his voice, Because he trusted the child, Beatrice, not the mother. His words held no judgment, only knowledge, as if he had watched Liam for many years and understood the stuff he was made of. Nathan stirred, slightly rising in his chair. "This changes everything," he said, looking at the floor. "If the money is truly tied to the child, Beatrice won't be able to touch it. Not legally." I picked up the second will again, the paper trembling in my fingers as if resisting being read. "And if she tries?" I asked. Jacopo looked at us both and nodded almost imperceptibly towards the flash drive lying on the table. "Then you use that. From what Liam told me, it contains everything. Every transfer, every account, every person who was in on it with him. He collected evidence like a spider spins its web, carefully, inconspicuously, and only he knew where its center was." Greta exhaled quietly, but as if fear had left her with that breath. "You have leverage, Beatrice," she said. And for the first time since the day I saw Liam's body and the cold in his eyes, I didn't feel small and deceived. I didn't feel like a woman who had been betrayed and left among the ruins of someone else's life. I felt a strange, dark calm, as if all the threads he had once used to control others were now in my hands. It was no consolation, but it was power. And it smelled not of revenge, but of the possibility of survival. Nathan looked at me seriously. "Beatrice, I think it's time we stop just reacting. We need to make the first move, before they make theirs." I nodded slowly, almost mechanically, because I knew he was right. We had to act while there was still something to save. "We're going to the bank," I said. By noon, we were standing in front of the Federal Trust Building, tucked between the gray facade of a law firm and an old stone mansion now listed as a historical monument. It didn't stand out, a place a person passes dozens of times without remembering, until suddenly it turns out that's where the answer is hidden. Greta stayed in the car. "If anything goes wrong, just text," she said, looking straight at me. "And if they don't let you in, cry. No one refuses a woman crying in a bank." Nathan smiled faintly. I did not. Inside, it was cool and quiet. The vault manager, a man with thin-rimmed glasses, took the silver key, checked my ID, and raised an eyebrow. "It's been many years, madam," he said. "The company associated with this box is registered under Mercury South Holdings. Are you sure you wish to access it?" I nodded. His gaze softened slightly. He led us downstairs to the basement, where the walls were concrete and the air smelled of dust and steel. The further we went, the colder it became, and the silence thickened until our footsteps began to sound like heartbeats. At the end of the corridor, he stopped at a massive door and handed me white gloves. "Standard procedure," he said. "We ensure complete confidentiality." The door closed behind us, the sound of the lock clicking echoing dully in my chest. I looked at the lock, my fingers trembling, but I inserted the key. "Ready?" Nathan asked. I didn't answer. I just turned the key. It slid in smoothly, as if it had been waiting for that turn all these years. The box drawer slid out. Inside, there was no money, no passports, no usual signs of the secret lives written about in newspapers, only a thick folder and a single photograph. In it, Liam, Nathan, and Jacopo, standing in front of a black SUV, smiling young, as if nothing bad had happened yet, and behind them, Victor Crane. I stared at the photo for a long time, trying to understand what seemed out of place. Their laughter, probably. "They weren't just partners," I said quietly. "They were a team." Nathan opened the folder. It contained dozens of contracts, registrations of shell companies, records of fund movements, all meticulously documented. And among them, one document highlighted in red font, "Insurance against Crane's blackmail." This wasn't just a warning. It was a weapon. Loaded, hidden, waiting. Liam had kept evidence against everyone, against his own, against himself. I whispered this aloud, and the words felt icy. He hadn't left me just chaos. He had left me a tool. We didn't go home. We went to a lawyer, Marcus Doyle, who had once handled my father's affairs. A dry, straightforward man, no sentimentality, but with a glint in his eye when it came to the law. I told him almost everything, without romantic details, without personal secrets, only what mattered: the threats, the documents, the offshore accounts, the key, the will. He didn't interrupt, only asked briefly, "Do you want to press charges?" I shook my head. "I need insurance." He nodded. "Then we copy everything. Digital copies, physical copies, 3 sets. One stays with me, one with you, and one with someone unconnected to you." Greta looked up and gave a grim smile. "I know such a person." And as the scanners hummed, turning pages into light, I realized how vast this all was. Liam had recorded everything: names, dates, sums, dummy accounts, partners, ghost companies. This wasn't just fraud, it was a system, an international network where money moved faster than conscience. And now that he was gone, they thought no traces remained. But they were wrong. By the end of the day, Marcus had drafted a simple, dry letter that resonated within me like a verdict, and I, without hesitation, added one line at the bottom in my own handwriting, just a few words. But they turned the paper into a challenge, and we sent it all to the office by courier. 15 minutes passed, and the phone vibrated. The voice on the line was like sandpaper, cold and hissing. "You think you're smart?" he hissed, and in that whisper, there was no title, only threat. I didn't raise my voice. "You found yourself in a difficult position," I said calmly, because calm seemed my only weapon now, and continued firmly. "You're right, but the next call will be to the tax authorities, and then to Interpol." There was a pause, then a laugh, soft and contemptuous. "Fine. What do you want?" "Nothing," I replied, and it was the truth. "I just want you to stop. No more calls, threats, or nightly warnings. Touch me or any of mine, and this folder becomes public." He stubbornly said he already had problems and hung up. 2 hours later, the phone rang again. A different voice even, refined, like a man whose smile opens doors. "Beatrice," he said, as if we were old acquaintances, and I felt a coldness in my throat because on the other end was Victor Crane. But I didn't let myself show fear. "Your accusations are hypothetical." He tried to discredit us, and I remained silent until he fell silent, then said directly, "Mr. Crane, I have nothing left to lose, and that makes me extremely dangerous." His silence lasted a minute. Then he hung up. We spent the evening on Greta's porch, the flash drive in Nathan's pocket, a copy of the folder buried in a flower box, and even if it seemed like paranoia, when you've been betrayed by someone close, paranoia becomes a way to survive. "I didn't know he was capable of this," Nathan whispered. "Mom said he was complicated." "And corrupt," I added quietly, looking at the cold stars above us, and we knew we weren't finished yet, because in Nathan's pocket lay another question, the small black flash drive we had left unopened until we were ready to face the next truth. For 2 days I prepared, rehearsed my face, my reactions, the things I thought might soften the blows. When we finally gathered in Greta's living room and I inserted the flash drive into the laptop, the screen flickered and showed a folder with my name, Eliza, and inside, one video, dated just 10 days before Liam's death. My fingers trembled, but I pressed play, and Liam appeared on the screen. Not the one who came to dinner on time and smiled at me in wedding photos, but haggard, with a shadow of stubble on his cheeks, his shirt as if he hadn't slept for weeks. He leaned towards the camera, and his voice trembled, but his words were clear. "Eliza, if you're watching this, it means I didn't have enough time or it ran out." He took a deep breath, rubbed his face with his palm, and continued as if confessing to himself, "There's no easy way to say this, so I'll say it directly. You were never someone I needed to hide things from. You were the one I wanted to protect, but I waited too long. Things are closing in now." A pause, and a heavy silence fell in the room. Then he uttered a name that struck like ice in my chest. There is a person you should be careful of, the one you trust more than you should. I felt my breath catch as he looked straight into the lens. It's Beatrice. The screen swallowed the sound of my footsteps, but the voice continued, now without the camera's web. She wasn't just someone I had an affair with. It was more complicated. She planned it from the start. The pregnancy wasn't an accident. The night I told her it couldn't go on, she said, if I left, she would tell everyone about my accounts, the dummy deals, everything I'd done to protect you. His words echoed loudly in the room, each phrase somehow both a verdict and a key to a lock I hadn't been able to open for so long. The camera shook, then his eyes on the screen blurred, full of reproach and regret simultaneously, and I understood that behind the mask of the perfect husband lay not just betrayal, but blackmail, planned for years, and now I had to answer. He leaned closer, and I almost felt his breath through the screen, tired, ragged, as if each word cost him effort. I think she killed Isabel, he said, and in that moment my mouth went dry, as if the air in the room had thickened and stopped moving. I can't prove it, he continued, but it all happened too conveniently. Isabel had just packed her bags and said she was flying to Lisbon, a one-way ticket, and then a car accident, a single car. No witnesses, no signs of a struggle. They said, brake failure, except she'd taken the car in for service the day before. He ran a hand over his face, not looking away from the camera, and his voice trembled. Beatrice knew she was pregnant. Isabel didn't. That changed everything. On paper. An accident, but you understand, Eliza, there are no accidents like that. Greta beside me covered her mouth with her hand, as if trying to hold back the horror that swept through the room, and Nathan across from me tensed, clenching his fists until his knuckles turned white. Liam, meanwhile, continued, now in a hollow, broken voice of a man who realized too late where his own decisions had led. I tried to fix everything, transferred money, made copies so that if anything happened to me, you would have a choice, a chance, a way to save yourselves. I'm sorry I couldn't do it sooner, that I had to go through so much pain to finally do the right thing. He looked away, as if he saw something off camera, and collecting himself for a moment, looked straight into the camera again. I was weak, but you are not. And if you decide to walk away from all this, just walk away. Take what is yours and leave the rest in the dust. But if you decide to stay and fight back, don't do it alone. The screen flickered, hissed, and the image died, leaving behind a silence that rang as if stretching from the very heart of the house. I sat motionless, unable to believe that all this was now my reality. He knew. He knew who she was, what she was capable of, and yet until the end he tried to manage this performance, even with his death, perhaps out of guilt, or perhaps out of fear. But now the truth was in my hands, and I had to do something with it. Beatrice had no idea I had seen the recording, not when I called her and invited her for lunch, not when I hugged her on the doorstep, whispering that I had missed her and wanted us to finally talk like real sisters. She smiled the way women smile when confident of their victory. She wore a pale blue dress that hugged her rounded stomach, and placing a hand on it, she laughed softly. He kicks when I drink orange juice. I smiled too, but my eyes remained cold. We sat on Greta's porch. The wind chased dust across the yard, and Nathan, claiming a phone call, went inside. Greta brought us sweet tea, and sensing the conversation would be personal, left us alone. I'm glad you reached out, Beatrice said, folding her hands on her knees. I was worried you were angry. I tilted my head and replied quietly, why should I be angry? Because my husband slept with my sister? Or because he left part of his inheritance to you? She blinked, the first crack in her flawless confidence. This is hard for both of us, she said hastily. Liam was confused. He didn't know what he wanted, but he loved you. No, I interrupted. He didn't love me. He put me in my place. Her face changed, the smile vanished, and I added, looking straight into her eyes, and he was afraid of you. Beatrice paled. I took the flash drive from my bag and placed it between us. The metallic gleam in the sun was like a blade. She looked at it, then at me. "I know everything," I said calmly, "about the accounts, the manipulations, the threats, about him wanting to leave you, and I know about Isabel too." Her lips trembled almost imperceptibly, but her gaze remained steady. "You can't prove anything," she said finally. "You're right," I replied, "but I don't need to." I stood up. "I won't go to court. I won't seek justice from a system that doesn't even know what the word means. I'll just walk away and leave you with everything you thought you wanted. The money, the child, the lie." She stood up too, breathing heavily. "You think that scares me?" she hissed. "No," I said, looking directly into her eyes. "But one day, it will." I turned and walked into the house, where Nathan was waiting for me. His gaze was serious but soft. He understood everything without words. Later that same day, I met with Marcus Doyle. I gave him the flash drive, a statement, and a short instruction. "If anything happens to me, send all this to the press." He nodded, asking no questions, and I returned home, to the place where I had once lived with Liam. The house greeted me with silence, and I walked through the rooms, touching the chair backs, door frames, cracked floorboards we had always promised to fix. I opened the closet, took out a suitcase, just one, leaving the others behind because you can't pack the past. In the garage locking the door behind me, I stood in the dark for a long time, not because I was afraid, but because I knew I wouldn't be coming back. A week later, I boarded a flight to Colorado. The air there smelled of pine and rain. A new name on the lease, a small house at the foot of the mountains, morning light, silence without shadows, no safes, no flash drives, no secret letters, just me, Eliza Armani, widow, survivor. Not the woman who was lied to, but the one who turned silence into freedom.